While there are several ways we might understand this term embodiment, here I'm going to unpack what I mean by it, plus also aim to offer some really fascinating science-driven insights into how integrating embodiment and what we also call somatics, this means engaging our whole body and physical aspects, how all of that can radically up-level your impact and effectiveness as a coach. On one level, embodiment can simply mean when someone or something epitomizes an abstract idea or a feeling or a quality, such as when we say, she's the embodiment of strength, or he embodies what it is to be gracious. Another way we might understand it is when it's used to highlight when someone just seems really comfortable in their own skin and they inhabit their body really fully and with ease. How are you with this? How are you in being fully in your body? Are you in your body at the moment, or are you just simply a little bit up here in the head? That's where we commonly spend a lot of our time, right? In his book, The Dubliners, the author James Joyce wrote about his protagonist Duffy that he lived a little distance from his body, regarding his own acts with doubtful side glances. And isn't that just pretty epitomizing how many of us actually exist, really just rather disembodied and up in our heads? The term embodiment even, the M is a prefix that means in. And so even together, that means we live fully in our bodies. We're in body. Which, seeing it's the only way that we can really know and interact with the world out there, is pretty important, right? In fact, the phenomenologist philosophies such as Husserl believe that the world is solely experienced at a really physical level, at a subjective level, with one of the Maurice Merleau-Ponty writing that the body is our general medium for having a world. This view still very much persists through to today and is very popular, and it's still clear that without a body, of course, and its perceiving acting abilities, there really possibly is no world, no way to know that world at least. How else would you know it? Maybe objectively it exists, but you need your senses. So embodiment has also really captivated the modern sciences, and particularly those branches seeking to understand how humans think, take actions and make decisions. The field of cognitive science is a multidisciplinary one that brings together really diverse areas such as psychology and philosophy and linguistics and neuroscience, and even kind of wild-sounding ones like interpersonal neurobiology, and even extends all the way through to AI and robotics, all aiming to get answers about how humans function cognitively. One of the most compelling theories from that branch of the sciences is called embodied cognition. So this gives us another real definition to work with, and I think this is really exemplified when the researchers Wilson and Golonka wrote in a paper that embodiment is the surprisingly radical hypothesis that the brain is not the sole cognitive resource we have available to us to solve problems. Our bodies and their perceptually guided motions through the world do much of the work required to achieve our goals. Incredible, right? We're so attached to the notion that all our thinking and decisions are about mentalizing our conscious intellectual processes. But modern science is actually just saying, yeah, that's not really how it works. The field is currently proposing what they call a 4E approach to understanding cognition and the mind. And this simply means that cognition and mind are embodied, and we're covering all of that, so we'll have more unpacking on that here, that also these are embedded. And so that all of these processes are deeply embedded within multiple contexts. They're within environmental contexts, within social contexts, within cultural contexts, and so forth. That they are enacted. These processes aren't static. They're not still nouns. These are moving, alive, dynamic processes. And so they're an enacted thing. And that also that they are extended. And this is really interesting, curious idea that we do see the notion of extended cognition, extended brain, if we just look at the way we might use tools, for example. There are ways of extending our cognitive resources. Smartphones are a perfect example of that. And even some people propose that it might be about when we actually work with others, other beings like horses, or when we see our partners as ways of extending our cognitive resources. So it's a pretty broad understanding of how cognition and mind function. So I think this really repurposes the idea where we've seen things such as mind equals brain, which Wilson and Golonka kind of say it's not that. And I've even heard people say body equals brain. And actually it seems like the reality is that the mind and cognition actually arise out of complex systemic interactions between the brain, the body, their environments, and all the relationships in between them. These are therefore what science calls emergent processes. And emergence is a really, really fascinating and quite a hot topic in the sciences these days. And so to understand that in really simple terms, and I'm going to be super simple here, is that when complex systems interact, they produce behaviours that are not the behaviours that they produce on their own. Something I would often call it as the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So if how humans think, make decisions, experience the world and take actions is an intrinsic property of their embodiment and these complex relationships of their body and its relationships, then engaging all of that in the coaching process would seem a really crucially important thing to do, right? Seeing that's all the stuff that we're aiming to work with as coaches in particular. And there is more. Apparently, the very act of language is an embodied process, right? The neurologist Ian McGilchrist tells us that the very structures of language and content of thought exist in the body prior to their utterance. Furthermore, linguists Lakoff and Johnson add that the very structure of reason itself comes from the details of our embodiment. The same neural and cognitive mechanisms that allow us to perceive and move around also create our conceptual systems and modes of reason. This is fascinating stuff. And then, of course, there's all the thorny business of what we call generally body language. And while really accurate statistics remain pretty contentious, non-verbal cues are widely considered to be more important for communicating meaning than verbal language, with non-verbal behaviours, according to the researcher Dan Siegel, they have been shown to be a primary mode in which emotion is communicated. Just incredible stuff. Now, one more data point on all of this is that those same cognitive scientists also believe that more than 95% of our cognitive capacity is actually functioning outside of the conscious arena. Yet they also say that that is shaping all of our conscious cognitive processes. And here's the kicker. Possibly the most effective way to interact with this space is, yes, our embodiment. They don't call intuitive intelligence gut feelings for no reason at all, do they? For a field like coaching, which is all about language and communication, good decision making, and new thinking, the body is clearly a crucially unavoidable resource we must be integrating into our processes. Yet, really confusingly, body-based coaching approaches still seem to remain a bit of a niche topic, just sitting on the outside and a bit left field. Why? Well, I believe, an answer, if not actually the answer, has a lot to do with the historic edification of intellectual and purely mental pursuits as somehow of really greater importance and value than our physical ones. Classic archetype is the nerdy professor is always considered to be so much smarter than, say, a beefy jock or a plumber, for example. Equally, gut feelings are not generally considered the top-level resource for good decisions when compared with, say, good old conscious logic and reason, right? Or are they? Now, curiously, the research seems to continue to point otherwise. And this is not to say that we need one of these processes over the other. But what if we combine all these aspects, particularly the physical, the mental, and all of this more, the relational, the dynamic, the movement, the enacted, right? I think the evidence on why we want to do so is absolutely compelling, as hopefully I've been laying out. And that evidence is also constantly growing. So how do we do this? How do we become more embodied? Well, I'm going to lead here by suggesting you might want to head over to a short free series on YouTube I've created called Embodiment Made Simple. I started putting this together because I just saw so much confusion in others, in my clients, in my program participants, and so forth, about how to become more embodied or what was meant by being embodied. And also that there was just such a huge kind of variation in abilities, and we can get very self-judgmental about this. The reality is some of us are rock stars and others are just having to learn to play the scales. I mean, there's plenty of reasons for this. But one thing I can absolutely assure you of is that everyone can become more embodied, more physically capable, literate, and as a result, better able to access their embodied intelligence. It simply needs all the areas like motivation, commitment, and consistent practice, just like everything else in life. Now, what we're primarily aiming to train when we start in these areas and develop, one way of understanding this is certainly to consider three key aspects of our physical awareness and that we can understand where we are in those. And the first of those is what we call interoceptive awareness. And that just simply means the awareness, the internalized awareness that we know our interior experience. Exteroceptive awareness or exteroception, and that is the exterior knowing, the exterior awareness. For example, you're listening, you're viewing, your visual sense at the moment. These are deeply exterior sensibilities. And the other is proprioception. Now, proprioception is simply the internalized knowing of the body in space. It's just one way we might talk about it. So if you close your eyes and raise your arm up beside your body, you just know internally that the arm is raised up beside the body. So proprioception is what helps us understand spatial relationships and movement and so forth. Now, for some quick tips, I'm going to turn to the cognitive scientist Guy Claxton. And Guy has a wonderful book titled Intelligence in the Flesh. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend you go and get it. And on this area of tips in how to develop embodied intelligence, Guy recommends 4 key areas. And I'm going to start with the last of his areas, but that one is exercise. And exercise is a little bit of a thorny topic. We have to be a little bit cautious around the area of exercise because for many of us, exercise is not really so much a way of developing a relationship with the body. It's actually become a way of just developing the body. And in doing that, all too often we tend to go to war with the body around that. We try and make it do all of these things. And really this form of exercise that we would most like to turn towards is something that will really help develop more the interoceptive and the physical awarenesses in ways that sensitize us rather than we try and force the body to do something. So everything is going to help. Everything is going to develop you and build a better relationship with your body, but finding ways to develop these interoceptive knowings of the body will be particularly helpful. Some particular forms of exercise that can help with that will be, say, slower forms of yoga. There are types of dance that we might engage in, and so there's many other, Tai Chi, Qigong, a lot of exercise forms like that. The second of these is a very interesting one called biofeedback. It is a science-backed process for developing interoceptive awareness. It's very curious. I highly recommend you just look it up. Do some search on that and you will find a whole lot of information about biofeedback. If that particularly sings to you, then it could be a great way for you to begin to develop interoceptive awareness. And also there are some very curious kind of ways within biofeedback that we can even begin to learn to, shall I say, control aspects of the body that are normally outside of our abilities. So the third that Guy recommends is mindfulness. And this is no surprise to me. I've been a mindfulness practitioner and teacher for many years. We have incorporated that within our coach training program. And I would suggest that rather than working with mindfulness as a way of trying to somehow control the mind or shut the mind down, as some people will have this kind of misapprehension about what mindfulness practice is. The really traditional practices, and the ones that we teach, for example, are taught through what are called the 4 foundations of mindfulness. This is a methodology that's been used in teaching mindfulness and practicing mindfulness for over 2,600 years. And the first of those foundations is mindfulness of the body. Mindfulness is a deeply embodied practice method. And then the fourth is a process called focusing. And this is a really amazingly impactful piece of work. It was developed out of the University of Chicago in the mid of the 20th century. It came out of a huge outcome study conducted for the eminent psychologist Carl Rogers, who developed person-centered psychotherapy. And they were trying to understand, why did some people change throughout therapeutic conversations, or we might say all sorts of conversations, and why did some not? And this was conducted by a chap called Eugene Gendlin, and Gendlin realized that what predicted people's ability to really change through those conversations was how they related to their internal experience, and this he turned into a process called focusing. I would highly recommend, if you're interested at all in this, that you could certainly go to our website. You can come and train with us if you'd like, but just get Gendlin's book. It's a fantastic, short, easy read, and it'll give you a great insight into this extraordinary embodied process. Now, applying embodiment is another whole kettle of fish altogether, right? So in my model, I propose that there are three fundamental areas for us to work in with coaching embodiment. And so in applying this, I'm also not going to go into any great depth with particular tools and techniques. If you'd like to know more about that, we have a free embodiment and coaching ebook that you can download from the website. We'll have a link down here below, so you can just go there and get the ebook, and it has lots and lots of tips in there about how to actually apply this. But for the three key areas, I propose that the first is the client and coach's embodiment. And this just highlights the fact that, first of all, we need to be embodied coaches. You can't work in a somatic and embodied manner if you're not embodied, if you don't have practices, if you haven't really developed this aspect of yourself as well. It's not going to go anywhere. So first of all, practitioners must be engaging in their own development in this area. And this is also the area where we can help clients develop. So we might help inform them around it. We might model our embodiment. We might invite them into greater embodiment within the session by, say, in-session rituals such as presencing and grounding that can really help support attunement and deeper connections, and just the ability for both client and coach to really foreground the body in their experience and in their awareness. And this area will also cover perhaps the client developing their embodiment externally to the actual in-session work, and this could be all sorts of somatic practices. It may even be somatic-based or embodied therapies that they might want to engage in that can help develop this self. And if they need healing in that area, it's not our premise as coaches, but it would be the place of embodied therapies. The second area that I like to talk about is what I call embodiment for new awareness. And in here, this is all the business of us focusing on body-oriented methods to help the client gain new insights and perspective, which is really the core stuff of great coaching. That's mostly what we're aiming to do, is to help people think in bigger and newer ways and take actions around that. So this could be techniques that we might employ within the session that engage movement or changes in posture, or just body-based areas such as focusing, or there's so many pieces of work that we can engage in within the session for creating new awareness, and they help the client tap also into this implicit cognitive process, the 95% that I mentioned earlier. And this really helps to enrich the coaching conversation. It brings greater insight, and particularly these body-based techniques for coaching approaches can be fantastic when the client has been just mentalizing, when that's their habitual way of processing, but they're spinning their wheels, they're just stuck. It takes us in another really fascinating direction, helps to bring insights that would not come if they just sat there thinking about a question. Now, the third of these areas is what I call embodying new awareness. And this domain revolves around how the client physically integrates and embodies their new insights or mindsets or behaviors. So some of this may happen within the session, but most of this tends to happen outside of the session. And it's the action-oriented side, the practice external work, the field work that the client engages in to really integrate, to take on this new way of being for them. I would sometimes say it's possibly like embodying their new way of being at a cellular level, we could say. So this helps them to really become more authentically something new, to embody their new developmental self at a more authentic level. So on top of this, these three domains for working with the client with embodiment, I also have developed what I call 7 primary avenues for working with embodiment within client-facing work. And these avenues are postural. So the body has a posture, it has a shape, it has a way of being, a way of sitting, a way of standing. And these are all critically important and interrelated with our feeling senses and our thinking senses. The second is environmental. So we already covered some of that the body is in an environment, it's in context, but this would often say be within the session, within physical environments. Next is kinesthetic. And for me, kinesthetic is really talking to the dynamic nature of the body in movement, in flow, and how that can generate different ways of thinking and different perspectives. The next is linguistic, and I already pointed at this with some of, say, McGilchrist's work that was highlighting how language has a deeply embodied place of origin. And this is also the area where we work with the embodied nature of language itself, its feeling sense with language and so forth. The next is affective, and that term affect is being used in the psychological way, meaning emotion. So this is the emotional body. We all know that the emotions are not simply kind of mental events. They are something that we know at a feeling level, at a felt level, an emotional level in the body. We all would easily be able to understand what happy feels like, for example, or what love or desire feels like in the body. So this is also the area that we might be, say, working with emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence, again, are not just a bunch of concepts, it's a bunch of feeling senses. And then the next is what I would call the reflective avenue, and the reflective avenue would cover things such as, say, focusing. It's deeply reflective. We're using the body in a very reflective way. It could also be where we're using the body as, say, a locus for reflection, inviting the body reflectively to offer up something to us, offer up new meaning, and we end up in a sort of reflective dialogue with the body. This can be a very powerful way of working with embodiment in coaching. And the final is what I call intersubjective, or also interrelational. And this can get a little bit deeper when we do that. The intersubjective or the interrelational body and that level of embodiment is a way of understanding our interrelationship with all other bodies. And it helps us with a deeper inquiry into me in relationship to all other bodies. And there are so many bodies, animal bodies, other human bodies, but there are planetary bodies, for example. We live on a great body, the great body of the Mother Earth for that matter, and these are unavoidable realities. So this area takes us a little bit deeper into all of that territory, and not something I'm going to wander off into right here and now. Of course, to go deeper on any of these areas is really the business of an entire course. But if you want to know more, then as I've said, just download our free ebook on embodiment in coaching, and the link will be put down below. And that is just packed with information and free tools and examples of how we might be able to integrate embodiment in coaching. And of course, if any of the science has caught your interest, there's a lot referenced in there. Another opportunity is to come along to one of our programs. We have a 2-day virtual embodiment in coaching workshop, and that is a really perfect way just to get a good taste of how we work and how you can bring these tools immediately and directly into your coaching. Now, I guess I sincerely hope I've at least piqued your interest in this area, because honestly, if you're a coach and you aren't incorporating this kind of work, then you are really missing out on a huge opportunity. If you are already exploring embodiment and somatics and integrating it into your coaching, then first of all, fantastic, well done. We love to encounter other people as interested as we are. And if we can help, we'd love to. If you want to deepen your work and you think we can offer something around that, reach out. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to make connections. And also, of course, just hunt around here. There's more clips. We have more on the way. And go to our website. There's plenty more information on there. Thank you very much for your attention and your time. And if you've lasted this long, then please, you could always help us out. Just subscribe to the channel, and we'd love to see you at some point in the future.